Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Set Point Podcast, the channel that talks about volleyball, leadership, team building, and much more. My name is Cesar Benacci, and I'm here with my brother, Peter Bristocci. How are you, brother?
What up, Cesar? Hello, everyone. Me again, ready to take notes, eyes and ears open. Let's talk volleyball and much more.
Yeah, and today we have a really special guest, like one of the most special guests in my volleyball career for sure. One of my big mentors, a great friend, guy that I met years and years ago and became a really important figure in my coaching career. So, with no further ado, Chris McGown. Chris, thank you so much for giving us this great opportunity to learn with you.
You guys are too nice, and it's awesome to be here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, Chris has a big history in volleyball. His last name already tells it all. But speaking a little bit about his career, he was a great player at BYU and then coached at BYU as well as an assistant coach and as a head coach of the men's program for many years. Worked at the Netherlands national team for a couple seasons. Did one of the seasons with Athletes Unlimited, which was one of the first professional leagues here in the United States, and then went to Japan for a couple seasons in Nagoya with the Wolf Dogs Nagoya. Uh, Also works at the USA Volleyball U23 Collegiate National Team and is the Gold Medal Squared co-founder and director, which we're going to talk a lot about. Chris, talk a little bit about, and not less important than that, is the first ever Love Beat champion. Yeah, with Austin, with the Austin team. So a couple years ago, a couple weeks ago, Chris was the champion of the very first season of the Love Bee. Chris, thank you so much for being here with us. Talk a little bit about your beginning for our Brazilian friends to get to know you. The American people know you a lot, but the Brazilians not so much. So tell us a little bit about your beginning.
Yeah, I didn't play volleyball in high school. My dad, of course, had been coaching and playing forever, but it just wasn't a sport here in Utah. And actually,
Mhm.
where I live in the state of Utah, they just sanctioned boys volleyball for competition. They've had
That's
girls
great.
volleyball forever, but boys volleyball for competition last year. So we're
Wow.
making
Wow.
some progress. It's just taken 30 some years to get here, but we're making some progress. But they didn't have that as a sport when I was growing up. So I just, did all the traditional American sports,
Mhm.
football, basketball, baseball, and American football, not football, not the proper football.
Right.
And then when I went to university, I went to BYU where my dad was coaching, and I played on the club team there, and it was still a club team. And
Mhm.
then I went away for a couple of years to live in Spain. And when I came back to school, the university had transitioned the team over to a varsity sport, and I got to play on the varsity team. My dad was coaching the team, and so my entire start in volleyball, I have to credit to my family, to my father, and
Mhm.
just you don't realize it at the time, and I certainly didn't when I was a player. But just I think looking back now, the genius of my father and his coaching methods and
Mhm.
the principles that he was espousing back in the 1980s, even,
Mhm.
and the early 90s, so decades, 40 some years ago, are still, you know, just as relevant today as they were back then, and as true today as they were back then. And so as a player in the summers, my dad would run these little camps for high school athletes, all over kind of the Western United States. And that's where I got my start in coaching, was coaching youth volleyball. So kids that were, I don't know, 11 and 12, all the way up to 18. And so what we would consider junior high school and high school age
Mhm.
here in the United States. And I did that for every summer while I was an athlete there at BYU
Mhm.
for 4 summers. And then I left coaching to start a career as an engineer, when I left university. And so I was a manufacturing engineer. I worked primarily in semiconductor and printed circuit board manufacturing. And
Wow.
right, yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah. So I was, yeah, mostly working with big semiconductor manufacturing clients. And we had a big contract with IBM that we were going to work on right about the time the dot-com bubble burst in the early 2000s. And this big contract went away. And so I found myself with a little bit of time. And my dad said, "Hey, I need some help with these camps that I'm running. And, you know, can you come and work out a few things with me? We're doing these coaching clinics now. And with Marv Dunphy and Doug Beal, could you come help us, you know, promote and do some things, get organized?" And so
Small names.
I kind of got sucked back into coaching. And so a little bit of time turned into more time and turned into more time. And I mean, you guys know it. It's this profession in which you experience the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And it challenges you in ways that I don't think any other job challenges you. And it requires you to live life in a way that very few professions require you to live. And then you get to experience all of the relationships and all of the excitement and all of the disappointment. And so it's just, for me, it feels like you're living life to the fullest when you're coaching volleyball. And it's something that, you know, while I loved engineering and I loved problem solving and I loved learning new things, and I found that incredibly interesting and compelling, there's just something about coaching athletics and competitive athletics that I just, you know, I keep getting drawn back to it. And so I feel like I'm so lucky to have had a career in competitive athletics, both as a player and then of course as a coach for all these years.
Yeah,
You know,
and
I was just gonna say that, you know how we always say that adding variability and unpredictability to our gym and our practices, that is the life of the volleyball coach.
yeah,
Yeah.
and Chris, you mentioned your father, so the great Carl McGown. It was one of the most important, most influential volleyball coaches of all times in the world, not just here. So, just for our Brazilian friends to understand, tell us a little bit about your father and how important he was for volleyball.
So he was really unique. He grew up in Long Beach, California. So he grew up playing volleyball on the beaches of Southern California and in what they would call the YMCA. So these were like youth centers where you could go and there were kind of, you know, something for the kids to do to keep them out of trouble. And a lot of YMCAs would have sports programs associated with them. And so he grew up in the, you know, in the 1950s and 60s in Southern California, playing beach volleyball, playing volleyball in the YMCA. And you know, found that he loved sports and started playing there, and then kind of just stuck with it. And he was always, I think, you know, early on, he liked to teach and he liked to understand what he was teaching, why he was teaching it. And so he went on to get his PhD in essentially physical education, but a branch of physical education, specifically the psychology of motor learning, so human motor performance. And he got his doctorate in that in the late 60s. And so along the way, he'd also been involved with our USA national team on the men's side. And of course, we were no good. USA was not a good volleyball country in the 60s and 70s. We weren't qualifying for anything, but he was involved in coaching. He got sent to Poland, actually, on a USA grant from the United States Olympic Committee to study Poland. How were they so good at volleyball? And so it was in a time when Poland was still part of the Soviet bloc. And so I think a really unique experience for him there. But he kind of ended up teaching, of course. He started out at at University of California, Berkeley, and then in the early 70s moved to BYU and moved our family here to Utah. And he was, working as a professor, teaching, but also stayed involved with our men's national team. And he was, I think, an instrumental part of, I want to say he went to 7 Olympics ultimately with USA men. I think his last one maybe was Beijing, when the boys won the gold there. But
Let's not talk
the
about this one, okay?
yes,
Because
that was
that's
that was
a sore
No,
subject for
I
no,
was
us.
going to say
no,
We
no hard
don't want to
feelings.
we could
remember
talk
that
about
one.
all the times that Brazil has beaten USA, but yeah. And
That's
so
awesome.
he, I think the things that characterized him more than anything was, I talked about it, just he loved to teach. And it's funny, I would talk to a lot of coaches, and I think it's not an uncommon sentiment that it's like he would say, "Man, I don't love the matches. I don't love the stress of competition. What I love is just being in the gym." And, him in a practice facility, with players that were ready to learn and work hard was like heaven. He loved teaching and helping
Mhm,
teams get better. And so that was him for his whole life. Even after
mhm,
he retired from BYU, when he was 65, he just wanted to be teaching and coaching. And so he loved to teach. And then the other thing was he had this background of this scientific rigor that came with, getting a doctorate in going through studies and understanding that if you're going to be teaching something, you better have some substance behind it. You better have some validation for why you're doing things the way you're doing things. And so he leaned heavily on his educational background in motor learning. And hey, I'm creating, these programs, these methods, these principles based on scientific study, based on what we know about the human brain, based on, experience and data. And so I think that was the other thing that really characterized him as a coach was
mhm,
he looked at it from a very kind of science heavy, critical perspective. And it wasn't just, hey, I think this works, or I feel like this worked for me as a player, let's do this. Or here's this fad that I want to kind of,
mhm.
think about pursuing. He was always the one that was like, okay, I want to take a look at that, whatever's going on there. And should we decide to do swing blocking? Should we decide to do jump spike serving? Should we decide to overhead pass? And so all of these questions of things that, you find in the game, he would ask the question, do we want to develop a big attack? Do we want to be setting like, Ricardinho? How do we want to play volleyball? And so he was this other, I think the other great thing about him was he loved to study the game, and he would look at everything that was going on, and he would see little nuances in the way players moved and in the way teams performed that nobody else would see. And he would recognize these patterns and these little pieces of, oh, did you see how this guy took this footwork? Or did you see where, Ricardinho set up when he was setting? And just little things that nobody else would notice. He had this great eye for detail. And then he'd ask the question, is that valuable? Is that something I want to teach? Does it mesh with the principles that I believe in? And and so I think he was really instrumental in kind of advancing the game, maybe ahead of his time, or in ways that other people wouldn't, because they didn't see those details and didn't ask the questions the way he asked them.
Mhm. It's incredible that you say that he's had such a love for practice and for all these details. And every person that I have contact that follows the gold medal squared methodology that I'm closer with, like G, of course, you, Jason, they all follow the same kind of philosophy. And one thing that your father had was he was one of the most kind people ever. Like the my very first coaching clinic that I did was with him, or you, and Jason. How lucky am I? And he was so, all of you, of course, but he was so kind. Said really kind words for me, and everybody that follows the gold medal squared philosophy have the same kind of behavior, which is amazing for our sport.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you just approached him with this sense of humility, like, hey, I'm here to learn.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can get better if you can help me get better. He was all in on
Yeah.
you.
Hmm.
And so I think if you just were willing to kind of ask questions and listen to answers, he'd invest completely in whoever you were.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And that's a great insight already for us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just be
Hmm.
willing to learn, open-minded and all that, right? All the time with
Yes.
everybody. That's awesome. Chris, I want to ask you about your coaching career. Obviously, other than your dad, the great Carl McGown, who are your references as coaches? Who did you look up to when you started coaching?
And, that was one of the things that I feel like just I couldn't have been more lucky is my foundation was with my dad. And
Mm,
so he would take me with him to go do these camps. And I got to just be in the gym with him, listening to what he said, how he said it, the rhythm of his words, all of that. And then I just his friends that were kind of I really liked, of course, everybody loves Marv. And so Marv has had this other massive influence on me. Maybe not even so much from a volleyball perspective, but just this is how a life that is well lived looks. And this is what being a man looks like, and this is what being responsible looks like. And this is how things are done properly, and just Marv does it right and in everything. And so like he was almost kind of this moral compass for me as much as anything, maybe even more so than X's and O's of volleyball itself. I coached with Rob Nielsen at BYU for a long time. Um, and with Mike Wilton, both of those guys were with me at BYU, and they're two of the greats. And
Rob's
Rob had
awesome.
this really inquisitive mind, and he's so sharp and so bright. And he was this invaluable assistant coach. Then I think I learned as much from him as he did from us, of course. And then just I've had so many good friends along the way that have been part of Gold Medal Squared that Mike Wall, of course, Joe Trinzi. I learned from him every time. He just asks all these really fascinating questions.
He's
And just again, like thinks about things in ways that I don't. And so I just love to hear him think out loud, and so just it's fun to get him talking and just listen to the way he thinks about volleyball and the way he sees it. It
we
really
work with
fascinates me.
Joe consults
Yeah.
for us at LMU Beach,
Yeah.
and we have calls with him every 2 3 weeks. Every call is like, how can you see that?
Yeah.
Today I was analyzing videos and he put a bunch of comments in our video platform. I was like,
Yeah.
man, that's fascinating. So
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
And just, I've learned a ton from Courtney Thompson. I've learned a ton from Heather Olmstead. I've learned a lot from Susie Fritz, just from Tom Black, from Keno Gandara, from just these wonderful people, just, bits and pieces along the way. And you see somebody doing it well, and it's like, man, I need to add that to how I coach or to what I coach, and I need to be more aware of these things. And kind of I think it's hard to go through the list of everybody, but I've tried really hard to kind of I think be like my dad and have an open mind about what other people are saying and how they're coaching and what they're doing, and then be able to kind of pass it through the filters and go, I want to do that, or and I don't want to do that. And so but I've been so lucky to get plugged into through Marv and Doug and my father, plugged into this incredible community. And I played with Jason Watson at BYU, and I played with Hugh McCutcheon at BYU, and I played with Kevin Hambley at BYU. And so those guys have gone on to do incredibly great things. And so I still feel this really close connection with them and with the things that they're doing. And so yeah, I would say the influences have been really broad, and I feel lucky to be able to be plugged into that, and then just being able to kind of be around a lot of these international coaches as well has been one of the fun things that has happened kind of later in my career, where I got to go overseas to the Netherlands and I got to go to Japan and doing some stuff with USA. You just get to meet this whole bigger group of international coaches, a lot of incredible Brazilian coaches, of course, and just, smart European coaches and South American coaches. So volleyball is this wonderful family. And I just feel like, it's, I don't know, just the amount and number of people that are willing to share information and to talk openly about their ideas and to try and help other people get better. I think it's really unique. You don't see that in other sports. And so I think we're lucky as volleyball coaches to have as many good people as we do that are willing to talk about the way they see the game.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we are trying to do in Brazil now, because Brazilian coaches, not so much. We learned, Peter and I learned, being here for so long, that sharing knowledge is the way to grow the sport. And we're doing this movement, this podcast, and other actions to create the same kind of, uh, like this chain of everybody helping each other.
Expand the bubble.
Expand
Yeah,
the
well,
Expand the
and for
bubble.
me,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, here's a hammer, and I really like this hammer, and you should use this hammer, right? And I don't give anything away by showing you the hammer. You still have to go take that hammer and go use it, right? And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
And learn how to use it.
and learn
Yeah.
how to use that hammer. And so, I always felt like I'm not giving any secrets away. If I'm telling people, hey, this is the way we should do things, you still got to go out and coach it. And
Right.
not everybody can do that.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, this
Perfect.
shared piece of information, it doesn't put my job at risk. It doesn't make you somehow, threaten me if I help you understand the game a little bit better. Because I still feel like I'm gonna keep trying to get good too.
Nice.
Nice. Very cool. And then gold medal squared, Chris. Gold medal squared, of course, has been a part of your life forever, I guess. Probably from the day zero until today.
Started in 1985, so I would have been
1980.
16 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, so as long as you know yourself as a volleyball person, player, then after that, coaching. Uh, so if of course, most of the people here in the United States know what gold medal squared is, but for our Brazilian friends, how would you explain to a person that never heard of gold medal squared? Uh, how would you tell them what GMS is?
I would say at its foundation, gold medal squared is a way of thinking about coaching and teaching
Mm-hmm.
and using principles to drive your coaching methods. And that's, I think, the kind of foundation is understanding here are the principles that govern teaching and playing the sport of volleyball, and how do those principles translate into what we see on the court. And so once we start understanding principles, we say, then you can start deciding, okay, these are good methods for teaching, and these are good methods for playing, and these are productive ways to, create systems. And so it's trying to empower coaches with this idea of principles. And then in our coaching clinics, we go through and we say, hey, the a very, very basic and simple application of these principles shows up when we start making decisions about mechanics. And so we kind of go through, here's what the principles look like when we think about how players should move on the court. We talk about offensive and defensive systems. Here's what the principles tell us about how you should play defense at various levels of play. Like if I'm coaching a 12-year-old team, it's probably a little bit different than if I'm coaching the national team. And so how do the principles guide our systems at various levels, offensively and defensively? How do the principles help me organize drills and activities in practice? How do the principles help me create the culture that I want in the gym? How do I, when people come to practice, what does it look like? What does it feel like? So what kind of culture am I creating? And then one of the big decisions, of course, that we talk about, the principles help us with is, how are you going to spend your time? and time is limited for everybody, for players, for coaches. And in the limited amount of time that you have, how are you going to best make use of that time so that when you go compete, you've used your time well, and what you're good at is what matters. And so, and then we kind of try to lean into that. So what matters? And how do we understand all these things? And so kind of understanding statistics and data and kind of the science behind some of this stuff. But I think at its core, Gold Medal Squared is understanding principles to help you make those decisions that we talked about.
And you guys always talk about the big rocks, right? The principles that are like the foundation, the ones that we really have to focus every single day, maybe.
Yeah, and so that's the story, right? Stephen Covey told this story in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He said, professor came and he had a jar, and he filled it full of big rocks. And then he said, is it full? And all the students said yes. And then he came and he took some smaller rocks that could fit within the cracks. And then he said, is it full? And they said yes. And then he went and he got some sand, right? And he poured some sand in, and it all went down in between all the cracks. And he said, is it full now? And they said yes. And then he went and got some water and filled it. And he said, what's the lesson? And one student said that you can always fit more in to your life than you think. And he said, no, that's not the lesson. He said, if you don't fit the big rocks in first, they'll never fit in later. And so that's when we talk about big rocks, it's like you can't fit if you don't get the most important things in now, they'll never fit in around everything later. So you better figure out what those big rocks are. What are the things that are most important? And for us, that's like, if I could be good at anything, or I could spend my time doing anything, what's going to provide the biggest return on that time when I start playing volleyball, when I go out and compete?
And what can you give us some examples of your big rocks as coach?
Man, so my dad loves to tell this story, and we laugh about it still, but he was really good at coaching blocking, so block systems. And for a long time, he was maybe the best in the world at coaching blocking. And so when he got to BYU as the head coach, when it became a team in the early 1990s, he said, we worked on blocking, and we worked on blocking, and we worked on blocking, and we got really good at blocking. And he said BYU was the best blocking team in the country for the university teams. In my first year, our first year, we were the best blocking team in the country. And we won 5 matches and we lost 22. And then the next year we worked on blocking, and we won 2 matches and lost 27. But we were the best in the world at blocking, or best in the country at blocking. And so he said, you can, and Stephen Covey talks about it, you can get really good at chopping down trees, but if you're working in the wrong forest, you're not getting anything done. And so he said, I had to go back to the drawing board and understand what wins volleyball matches. And it wasn't blocking. You can be really good at blocking. And it turns out if you're not so good at some of these other skills. And so for me, when I went down to Austin, for example, I ended up with the team kind of halfway through the season. And we got in and we made this big list on the whiteboard. Here are all the things that we need to get better at. And then so some of it, I just said, man, it would be nice if we could do this, but I don't care. I'm going to give that away and I'm not going to worry about it. And so there were a lot of decisions like that where I just had to decide, this isn't important to me, or it isn't important enough. It's not going to make a difference in the time we had. And for me, I've kind of I think my dad approached the game from kind of a defensive mindset. So he was always kind of thinking about things that way. The way he even drew lineups on the board were their offense coming at us, right? And so his vision was, hey, I'm drawing things on the board where it looks like the opponents are coming at us. And so I don't know, somewhere along the way, I kind of started thinking about it a little bit differently. And now I'm very much more oriented towards offense. And even the way I draw things on the board is us going at them. And so just as we start looking at, again, what wins volleyball matches, it's offense. It's primarily attack. Can you kill the ball at a higher rate and be more efficient than your opponents? And that's the single biggest predictor in almost every level of play. With the little kids, it's kind of serve it in and be able to play it underhand a little bit. If you can serve it in, you can probably win a lot of matches, but as soon as we start kind of getting into 13s volleyball here in the United States anyway, it's about attack, and it stays about attack at every level of play above that. There's this massively high correlation of who wins international tournaments and the attack percentage, attack efficiency. And so usually the team with the greatest attack efficiency is the one that is winning all of these. And obviously there's a lot of interplay between serving and reception on attack, because if you can serve really well and your opponents aren't passing well, it makes it harder for them to attack. And obviously, there's this also interplay with defense, right? If I can dig some balls and create more opportunities for my team to attack, that's also good. But at the end of the day, it's, who can attack the best. And at lower levels of play, especially in women's volleyball, that often looks like who's the left side attacker. And at the highest levels of play, it often looks like who's got the best opposite with the guys, And so a lot of times, your maybe big gun outside hitter and big gun opposite dictate the outcome. And so, it's nice if you can develop those players, but it's nice, as well, if you can teach everybody on your team optimize for attack. So when I went into Austin, that was kind of my primary focus, was how can I optimize our attack? And there were some weaknesses we had with reception, and we needed to be able to serve a little bit more tactically. And so, and I wanted to introduce the defensive system that I like, because I felt like we could generate some opportunities to transition, especially in women's volleyball, more opportunities to transition. And so there was some time learning our defensive system, but the majority of my focus was always, how can I help our setters get better at setting our hitters? And how can I help our hitters get better at killing the ball?
That's
I
awesome.
have a quick follow-up, if you allow me.
Of
So you
course.
said offense and attack. Which attack or which offense? Do you have a belief in a particular type of attack? There's first ball side out, side out.
So the data would suggest that the higher the level of play, the better the level of play, the more important first ball becomes. And as play gets a little bit less important or less intense and high level powerful, it becomes pretty equal, transition, attack, and first ball. And so in women's college volleyball, for example, the best teams are right about 50-50. So half of their attacks are in first ball, half of their attacks are in transition. In the Olympics with men's volleyball, highest level of international play, it's probably 60-40, 65-35, somewhere in there. 65% of the balls are, being attacked in first ball, 35, maybe 40% are being attacked in transition. And so the better you are, the more important first ball becomes. And as the level gets down a little bit, kind of transition and first ball end up about equal.
Attack nonetheless, right? Offense
Attack nonetheless.
Yep.
Offense nonetheless. Yep. And of course you have to dig in order to transition, and you have to get some block touches in order to, and you have to have some block and defense in order to play in these transition rallies. And we've seen, I think, teams like France to some degree, especially in the men's side, advance their block and defense to the point where, they're creating maybe more opportunities than we've traditionally seen. I thought that was one of the things that kind of characterized those teams, was they were creating a few more opportunities on defense than their opponents. And then they had some great creative hitters that could go solve those problems once they dug a ball. And Inga Peck could do some magic, and Patry could just go bomb, and their middles could, they
Yeah.
had these giant middles. And so France could do some things, I think, once they dug a ball that
Yeah.
other teams couldn't.
They
Nice.
probably had the two best outside hitters in the Olympics for sure. Clevenot
Yep.
and Ingapet solving all kinds of problems, recycling the game, you
Yep.
finding all kinds of fingers. They're just amazing.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
in the I'm gonna
As the level gets higher too, the other big thing, thinking about France in particular, is as the level gets higher, setting becomes more important. And I thought Brizard was unreal. He's been so good for them for the last 6 years. Like, he was so good in Tokyo, and he was so good in Paris. And like, he's my favorite setter right now. I love watching him play. And I thought that's where Brazil, especially in the early 2000s,
Yep.
they were able to change the game of volleyball because of what Ricardinho could do as a setter. Like, that team didn't work with anybody else setting, not as well. They were still a really good team, but for me, he was a magician, and he made that team go. Those guys were unreal, but it's because he kept everybody in rhythm, located. He was so good.
Nice. We could talk about this for ages, right?
Yeah. Don't get me started. I love
Right?
thinking
Yeah.
about this stuff.
So
So it's good.
before I'm Cesar's gonna kill me, but I have to ask you this. What would
I'm
you
not.
say to coaches? Because I have a youth volleyball bias and background. So what would you say to coaches? And then we see this often, coaches that work with youth and kids and teenagers, and then we are so focused on, passing, setting, ball control, and all these things. And we often see attacking being neglected, right? And so you have a great team that can pass, that can set, but never puts the ball away. What would you be your tips for coaches that work with youth in that regard?
Yeah, I would say spend more time early on with the mechanics of attacking. And so the two things for me that are huge are, well, three things, and we talk about them when we look at, here's what the great attackers have in common is they have good footwork. So the rhythm of their footwork is really good. We like a 4-step approach. So right, left, if you're a right-handed hitter.
Mm-hmm.
And just the rhythm of that, being able to kind of go slow and then speed up. So good footwork, and then getting this double arm lift, right? Getting your arms sequenced with your approach. And then the magic really is in this shoulder turn, this kind of open attack, and getting power through rotation. And so I would spend a lot of time developing those mechanics. And I would worry a lot less about, hey, I'm going to keep every ball in play early on, as to, hey, how hard can you hit this? And developing power in my attackers. And it's one of the things we see kind of, I think, that Brazil has always done really well is, I don't know, I just see these good attack mechanics from their athletes. And in the USA, we see a lot of girls just hitting the ball with their arm, especially our women athletes, just kind of hitting it with their arm. They aren't getting these great athletic rotational positions. And so I would just say, spend more time. One of the questions about how are you going to spend your time? I would just say, spend more time working on attack, and specifically those three elements of attack: footwork, arm lift, and this good kind of powerful rotational position. And you can do it lots and lots of ways. I can toss balls. I can make it easy for setters to set them, but also kind of creating an understanding of a connection with setters and hitters, right? How do I know when to start my approach? How high is a high enough set? Kind of developing this feel with setters and hitters in rhythm. And that's really kind of one of the other big things, right? Is when you see youth volleyball, the hitters so often don't know what's going to come out of the setter's hands, and they just don't know what to expect. So they kind of wait, and then maybe I'm running, or I go stand near the net because that's where the ball is going to end up. And so I think developing that relationship between the setter and the hitter, working on that and having a way to communicate about this was a good set or this was too high or this was too fast. And early on, you don't need to make it too complicated. It can just be, maybe two sets is all you set, a high ball and maybe a lower ball. But just, I think, again, just spending the time with those things. And if you have opportunities to warm up with some attack. It doesn't have to be full jump, but you can do some warm up where you're attacking. And naturally, we'd like to be able to control the ball underhand. But I feel like for me, anyway, I can teach serving and passing. I can make you better at those two skills a lot easier than I can make you better at attacking, especially with your arm swing. And so I feel like I can always kind of catch up with passing to some degree, and I can kind of catch up with serving to some degree. But attack mechanics take a lot longer. And so if I'm behind there, it's hard to catch up. And especially if I've come with an athlete that doesn't have optimal kind of swing mechanics, arm swing mechanics, those are really, really hard to reteach and for an athlete to relearn and get better at.
That's great. That's great. So since we're talking about, these kinds of things and principles and what wins in volleyball. So let's go back and talk about Gold Medal Square. And so you said 1985, that's when it started, right? And so
Yep.
I imagine that your answer to my question is going to be yes, but I might be wrong. So has GMS gone through changes in the way it sees and understands the game over the years? And if so, what do you think were those changes, and what were the main drivers of those changes?
Yeah, I would say there have been some subtle changes. I think the changes have been more in maybe systems
Okay.
than in how, and then mechanics. That was one of the things that I thought my dad had dialed in really well early on, was this is how the best players move.
Okay.
And you still see like the way we taught attack, the way we taught passing, setting has maybe changed a little bit more than some of the other skills. But the way we taught almost all of these skills hasn't changed in 40 years. And it's still, when I see the best players play, it's like, oh yeah, that's how, you're the best in this decade and you do it like they did 30 years ago. Those are still optimal mechanics. And so I would say a lot of the mechanics have changed or have stayed the same. I think setting has changed a little bit. And it's just, I think what has happened is we've seen some players that have done some kind of instinctive things, and then you see, ooh, that actually is better. Like, the way that Brazard is setting is better than the way that, we were doing it before. The way that, Ricardinho is setting is better than the way we were doing it before. And so that's setting. I think a few things have changed. And then just the progression of the game through some rule changes, and obviously through just how physical and athletic the athletes, how long and tall they've become. Just the game is being played faster, and with, the advent of back row attack being such a strong feature in men's volleyball, especially, and now I think, it's showing up in women's volleyball as well. Some system stuff has had to change, and then how you play defense against four attackers is different than how you used to be able to defend just the Russians setting these giant high balls, so yeah.
Yeah, and now Chris, that I'm going back to indoor volleyball, I have to go to a coaching clinic again.
Yeah.
But Gold Medal Square has a lot of tools online that we can use, right? So talk to us about those tools and what's available for coaches.
Yeah, virtually everything we know and the accumulated knowledge of, all these coaches over 4 decades of work is online, and we're calling it GMS
That's
Plus.
incredible.
Yeah, and if you go to goldmedalsquare.com, you'll see we've just redone a lot of the back end. And so I think it's really well organized and really well structured. But if you want to know, hey, how does gold medal squared, how do we want to teach passing? You can go and log in, and there are all these videos on here's how we teach passing, and here's how we teach all the skills, all the systems. How do we teach defense? What kind of defensive systems do we like? How do we teach, if you have to defend against a free ball or a down ball, what kind of systems do we like for those? And so it's just this incredibly broad library of just everything that like I said, everything we know about volleyball. And we've tried to make it, as accessible as you can online. It's always best to do something like this in person, but when you're interacting, but we've made it as good as we think we can online. And we've got video examples of young kids doing this, of big kids doing this, of pros, of college kids, everybody. And so you can kind of see how it fits and works at every level of play. And then all of the drills that we like to do and how we run them and how we score them and how we coach them, and just all of the variations of those are also in the library. And you can see, oh, Chris likes this kind of 6-on-6 drill, and here's how he runs it, and here's how he scores it, and here's how he's entering balls. And and you can see that from dozens of different coaches. And so we're really proud of all the work that's gone into it, and feel like it's this incredibly good resource.
Oh, I spent hours and hours in that website. I haven't been much on lately because I've been coaching beach volleyball, but I will work really hard to win our conference this week now, and then do really good in our NCAA tournament as well next weekend. And after that, I'm deep diving into
All in,
GMS Plus
all
again.
in with the indoor stuff.
All
Yeah,
in, yeah.
I love it.
Here's an every week, more than every week, like almost every day, dive into plan practices. It's great.
Awesome. Chris, and then Love Bee, how was that experience? It was pretty, I don't know if it was unexpected for you, but how was your experience with that league?
So it was wild. The coach had left, the previous coach had left mid-season, and I got a text from Courtney on a Friday. Courtney Thompson, who's helping the league. She's one of the administrators of the program there. And she said, hey, any interest in, coaching the Austin team for the rest of the season? Ha ha, like thinking there'd be no way. And I said, tell me more. And she said, so you're saying there's a chance? and so I talked with my wife, and I just said, hey, here's this opportunity. It's 2 months. I think, it would be kind of neat. And the city of Austin is awesome. Austin, Texas is this really, really cool town. And so she said, green light. And so we went, I think it was over a holiday weekend in February, and we went out of town with my daughter for Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I came back and packed on Tuesday, got on a plane Wednesday morning, got picked up from the airport. They got me a rental car. They got me an apartment. I threw my bags in the apartment, and we drove to the arena. And I met the team, I don't know, an hour before we took the court. And I said, all right, great to meet you. I'm your coach, Chris. We're going to start in rotation 5. Here's the starting lineup. We're going to serve
a game, before
a match. Yeah. The very first match we played. And so it was, I got a text from Courtney on a Friday, and I was on a plane on Wednesday and coaching a match Wednesday night. And
that's crazy.
And I coached a match Wednesday night, Thursday night. We won both of them. And I thought, this is easy. Look at this. And it turns out it's not so easy. And then we had a really up and down regular season, and lost more than we won. But I kept feeling like we were making slow progress. And again, like thinking about what do we need to work on? What do we need to get better at? And we had some incredibly talented athletes in the gym. And so just helping them, I think, regain confidence and be a little bit better at some of these important skills Ironically, we're the best blocking team in the league. I was laughing about that. We're losing matches and winning the blocking battles, and I was like,
Carl
"Oh
will be
man, this is
really proud of
a
you.
familiar story right here." Yeah.
Yeah, Dad will be proud.
And the format of the league, it was its first year of existence, 6 teams, and so the format was everybody was going to make the finals, and where you finished the season is how you got seeded into the tournament. And the top 2 teams had a bye, and so it was a quarterfinals, semifinals, finals. And our quarterfinal match was against Salt Lake, and it was like a match I've never been a part of. Every single game, it might have been the most points scored in any match ever, kind of thing.
Oh,
And
wow.
Joe did the math on it, and it's the odds of the scores being what they were 1 in 1,200.
Oh,
And so
wow.
every
Wow.
set was a 2-point set, and all but one of them was extra points. And so I think it was 26-24, 26-24, 25-23, 26-24,
Oh
and
my gosh,
then
so close.
the fifth set was 18-16. And so just this incredible back and forth battle with
Yep.
Salt Lake. And kind of towards the end of the fifth, we had a couple players just, take these enormous, courageous swings, just started bombing balls. And after the match, I was like, where has that been all season? Like we need more of that. And after that match, I kind of thought, you know what, we could do this. We're good enough. And then we had to play the number 1 seed, Atlanta. And they were really good all season. They had 2 great passing outside hitters. They had a great libero. Their opposite, Catino, was really good. 2 solid middles.
Yes.
They just were really, really just, and they kind of handled us pretty good in the first 2 sets. Just, just back to business, and we were just getting beat up. And then something happened in the third, and we just kind of found a few things. I don't know, just and then I think they kind of got a little bit shaken, like, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to just roll these guys in 3. And then they fell apart in the fourth set. I think we beat them 25-10 in the fourth. And then I just kind of, after that, I was like, we're winning this thing. We're winning this match. And played well in the fifth and ended up winning another 5-set match. And so in both against Salt Lake and Atlanta, we were down 0-2, won the next 3.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
2 pretty epic,
A reverse
gives
2
the
sweep.
pretty
team
epic
such a-
wins right
yeah.
there. And then
Great for the first
going
year
into
of
the
the league.
final, going into the final, I felt like we had this great feeling, and people were feeling really confident. We had a really good game plan, and the girls just executed our plan perfectly, and played really, really well in the final. And we ended up being champions of the first season in League One
That's so
Volleyball.
cool.
And it
That's
was
really
just like, and I talked about it, just this incredible high after some really low lows, like some really tough moments during the season for everybody, for the athletes, for the staff. And so I was just so pleased for the players and for the rest of our staff that we got this really positive outcome in the end, because heaven knows they'd been through a lot that season, changing coaching staff, losing more than we're winning, and just all of the, I don't know, stress and I think frustration that comes with giving everything you have and then, still losing matches. And that's sport, and it's one of the kind of beautiful things about it, but it's also one of the just like pull your heart out and smash it things about it, right? Like you can work as hard as you possibly can, do your very, very best, and sometimes other people are better. And it's what makes it interesting, of course, and it's what pulls you in. But and so just coming out with a win in the end after this miraculous run through the semis or the quarterfinals and the semifinals, really, really fun to be a part of.
I loved your celebration running around the court.
Yeah, I was
Super cool.
telling her there was a lot of pent-up drama in that run around the court here. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Really cool. Really
So,
cool.
And so I'm really excited for the league and for what they've done, the commitments that they've made, both financially and in terms of personnel. And it's, I think, a really interesting landscape right now, professional volleyball here in the United States.
That's my
Um,
next question for you. This is pretty much in that
yeah.
line. You just set me a perfect ball, no
Oh, yeah.
blockers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, from somebody who's inside, where do you see the league going and how big can it become?
So I think for sure, they talk about headwinds and, just the challenges that the league faces. One of the big challenges is they don't have the male counterpart. So the WNBA is, I think, the best analogy for, pro volleyball. And you can see a lot of the WNBA has benefited from being associated with the NBA, with the
Mhm.
men's league, and the women's volleyball leagues don't have that same association because there is no men's pro volleyball. Well, there is, but
Mhm.
it's not at that scale, right?
Mhm.
Women's volleyball is going to be what it is. I think the good things for them are that there's a lot of interest in women's sports in general right now in the United
Mhm.
States, and with that interest comes money. And so there's, I think, at least the financial and investment climate, in the not so distant past has been one of we'd like to invest in this and see where it goes. And so, like all of these kinds of projects, it takes money. And so, how do you fund this long enough to kind of where it settles in and now becomes its own viable thing? And so they've got a lot of work in front of them in terms of raising capital, in terms of creating interest with broadcasters. That's going to be the biggest thing. Is just TV revenue. That's what's driving all these other successful sports. And then ultimately where we've got, I don't know, two big leagues and maybe a third kind of also sitting out there, and then Athletes Unlimited is still going, and so there are
Mhm.
kind of all these volleyball entities. How do they end up coalescing, or do they stay separate? I'm not quite sure yet, um, how that's all going to go, but they've got a lot of good things going for them. Oh, sorry.
Bless you.
Oh, thanks.
How do you
I
say in
think they've
Brazil?
got a lot of
Saúde.
obrigado. Yeah. And so a lot of good things going for them because I think there's a lot of goodwill in the volleyball community. A lot of people want
Mhm.
this to succeed. And and so just how do you connect with these volleyball audiences, um, to get people continuing to be excited about the sport at that level of play? And so, yeah, it's, you know, I think the good news is there are enough people in really, really significant positions that want to take a gamble. And some of these like billionaire owners of sports teams are like, sure, I'll buy a volleyball franchise. The amount of money that I have to invest in that volleyball franchise is trivial. It'd be like you and I spending $1,000, like, sure, I'll bet $1,000 that this thing will blow up, and
Mhm.
like, why not? It's an easy, that's a small dollar request or something for some of these big individuals. And so I think that's kind of the mindset of the leagues right now is, hey, can we find people that have deep pockets that are willing to take a bet on this sport that's, and this that's having a moment with women's sports here. And so I'm optimistic. I think
Mhm.
the athletes are really charismatic for one thing. They're well spoken. They're easy to relate to. They're very accessible, in terms of, hey, I get to meet my heroes that I really love. And the athletes did this incredible job of, I don't know, just engaging with the fans and being part of the communities that they were in. So, like I said, I'm optimistic that good things will happen here.
Are you optimistic enough to believe that there will be a men's league as well? Because if you see, like internationally, US is super relevant in men's volleyball. Like Olympic medalists since the 80s, beat Brazil so many times. We don't even want to talk about that, but the relevance of men's volleyball internationally for USA is gigantic. So, do you think that will ever happen?
Yeah, so I think for the Brazilian audience to understand American volleyball culture, you have to understand politics. It's probably the same in Brazil, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Everything's political.
yeah.
But one of the things that that we've done in the United States in the 70s, early 70s, 1972, in fact, I think, was they passed legislation that at the university, at the collegiate level, that there had to be equitable resources for both men and women in education at the university level. And so these sports that have been associated with universities, that legislation extended out to these sports. And so if you were going to have, 100 men playing sports, you had to provide opportunities for 100 women to play sports. And the math doesn't always pencil out that way, but that's the idea behind it. If you were going to give 100 men's scholarships, you had to have 100 women's scholarships. And so one of the kind of, that's the politics behind it. But the practical application is that American football takes up this huge number of athletes. And so they've had to create a lot of women's sports to kind of, a men's football roster might be 125 athletes.
Holy cow.
They're gonna have 85 football
How many volleyball
scholarships.
teams?
And so how do you offset that? Yeah. And so they've got to have a number of women's teams, hey, how do we figure out 125, women's sports worth of, you're not going to have 125 roster volleyball team. And so there are a lot of women's sports that are in place where men's sports are not. And so there are over 300 Division One at the highest level of university play here in the U.S., over 300 programs that have women's volleyball and around 30 some that have Division One men's volleyball. And so that's kind of what we see is women are participating in the sport of volleyball at roughly a 10-to-1 ratio to the men. And so the fact that our USA men have had the success that they've had in Olympic tournaments, international tournaments, that they've been as good as they have been, I think is a tribute to our systems and the way that we train the game and just some of the athletes that have come through that have been pretty special. But it's so the question goes back to, will there be a pro men's league? It's just the volume of athletes playing, or the number of athletes playing volleyball, and the interest in men's volleyball here in the United States, I think, is still pretty small. And so a pro men's league has always been a big challenge. Whereas, we've got 500,000 girls playing volleyball at any point in time that are, between the ages of 12 to 18. Mm-hmm. We've maybe got 50,000 boys that are playing at that level, and so it's just a little bit tougher, I think. And then you just, again, one of the things that you have to think about is, where does the funding come from? And it would be awesome if somebody that was a volleyball fan created the next Facebook and became a billionaire and could fund the league, kind of thing. Yeah. And so
I would come out of retirement.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, exactly. And so where does the money come from? And then you have to start thinking back to television revenue. And there are so many sports that are competing with, each other to get television revenue, to get viewership. Sure. And so you got, I don't know, just there's hundreds of sports here in the United States that are all, hey, we got skiing, we've got motocross, we've got tennis, we've got golf, we've got football, basketball, baseball, we've got other levels of football, another league of football, another league of basketball, minor leagues of baseball. And so it's just, there's so many other sports that are competing that you have to be pretty special. So it would be awesome. I'd love it if we could get a bigger, I don't know, a men's volleyball pro league here in the USA. But right now, I think we got our hands full just trying to get the women going.
Definitely, yeah. And you see the AVP, the Beach Volleyball Professional League, that has to change format every time to get some audience, to get the both genders going. That
Yes.
it's super challenging for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I could not thank you enough for coming on here today to talk with us. You have no idea how influential your work is for coaching education. A lot of people um, look up to you and what we do with Gold Medal Square, and now seeing you on TV here in house. So huge congratulations on winning, and especially now listening to you talk about the challenges that were, jumping in this boat at Love B. So congratulations again. Thank you so much for separating some time from your schedule to come on here talk with us. Wishing you all the best, a lot of success. May your Japanese become fluent. May you become fluent in Japanese.
Arigatou gozaimasu. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Already better than me. And so, yeah, man, we wanted to invite you to come back again and maybe sometime to talk about some more specifics about volleyball and training. But thank you. Thank you so much.
Mm.
Yeah, you guys, of course, anytime. It's super fun for me to get to talk volleyball. And I just like you guys, I've been so fortunate in my life and my career to be around so many good people and so many, I don't know, generous coaches that have helped me along the way. And I just, you guys know how it is. It isn't you that did it, right? It's somebody else, and you were just kind of maybe smart enough or lucky enough to be in the right place. And I talk about it all the time, to stand on the shoulders of giants, and I
Yep.
feel like that's what I'm doing here. I'm kind of hanging out, standing on the shoulders of giants, and so it's really fun for me to get to pass along some of what I've been taught over all these years.
And what I'm doing here is exactly that. If I'm here today speaking about volleyball, doing this podcast, talking to our Brazilian audience, and in some way teaching them everything that we learned here, is because I'm standing on your shoulder, and on G's shoulder, on Jason's shoulder, of people that took me when I was a baby here coaching in the United States, and and took me by the hand all through my entire career here. So, Chris, I cannot thank you enough, man. You're a great friend, great mentor for me. I look up to you from the day zero that I met you until probably the rest of my career here. So
You
I
guys are too
really
nice.
appreciate. No, no,
Yeah,
and I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart, because I not only know you as a coach, but as a person as well. So I respect so much everything that you have done for the sport and for me as well, directly and indirectly, through Gold Medal Squared, through G, through all those people that have been a part of my life. So thank you for giving us this opportunity here, and good luck in the rest of your challenges with the national teams, with Love B eventually if you come back. And I will be again jumping into indoor volleyball through Gold Medal Squared, in a coaching clinic in person through GMS Plus and all of that. So thank you
I
so
love it.
much, man. Thank you
Okay, yeah,
so
my
much.
pleasure. Anytime, you guys.
Awesome. All right, guys, thank you so much for following this episode until this point. And it was great to have Chris here, and we'll see you on the next one.
Come back and check the next one, guys. See ya.